We are jumping back to our NHL off-season plan series. Today we look at the 16th ranked team from the NHL's regular season, the Calgary Flames. There's lots of change going on with Calgary. What more will we expect from them throughout this off-season? We'll discuss their possibilities coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're jumping back to our off-season plan series here today, taking a look at the 16th ranked team from the regular season, the Calgary Flames. Now, of course, they're a team that's gone through a fair bit of change here already. And we're probably going to see some more as they kind of get some new people in the works here to take over this franchise and see where things head to next. So in case you're new to this series, essentially how it works is we're going to recap last season, take a look at the 22-23 season, analyze a few key team metrics, take a look at their cap space, what changes have we already seen, what internal business do they have to take care of, so RFAs, UFAs, that kind of thing with contracts. And then we're going to take a look at the top burning questions facing this franchise as they prepare for the full brunt here of the offseason, because we're just kind of getting into the thick of things here in the next few weeks. And there's a lot of questions facing this franchise for sure. So let's get started with a 22-23 season recap here for Calgary. Now, they finished with 93 points, a record of 38, 27, and 17. The funny part here is that in the Eastern Conference, they actually would have made the playoffs. The team in the final, the Florida Panthers, actually got in with 92 points. Look where they are now. So obviously the playoff format didn't work in Calgary's favor this year, but certainly some food for thought based on how they did. It really wasn't that bad of a season, but certainly some work to do to get ahead of the other Western Conference teams that they're competing with. They scored 260 goals last season for 19th best overall, so that certainly needs to improve. Goals against was at 252 for 13th best, so a team overall plus minus of +8. So not fantastic, but certainly not worse, the worst in the league either. Special teams penalty kill was actually really strong, 82.6. It was the 5th best in the league, but the power play was not as great as it needed to be, 19.8% for 19th best. And considering what they have for players that they could put out there, that's certainly not good enough at all. Now, this team, like I said, went through a lot of change between the end of the season. Them not making the playoffs. They've been in off-season mode here for a little bit. Of course, the first big news that came out is that Brad Treliving left the franchise. He was offered a contract extension last year, chose to wait. Head coach Daryl Sutter accepted his, but then at the end of the year, it was believed that Brad Treliving didn't really know what he wanted to do. A lot of people suggested that he couldn't work with Daryl Sutter anymore, didn't want to go through that, and then ownership was not approving of Sutter being let go, so Treliving opted not to accept the contract extension, and he walked away, opening the door for them to go down the road of a new general manager. Now, of course, during that in the GM process of finding the new guy, Don Maloney, who was already with the team, takes over as president of hockey ops and was the interim GM who was in charge of finding that next person. And he ended up convincing management or ownership to let go of Daryl Sutter. So they ended up firing Sutter anyway. So can you imagine Treliving leaves because he couldn't work with Sutter anymore, and then they decide after to let him go? A lot of people think that if they could have let Sutter go sooner, that Treliving would have actually accepted a contract extension and still been the GM of the Calgary Flames today. Of course, we now know Brad Treliving just accepted the role and is now the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But maybe he felt it was time for a change regardless. But at the end of the day, both the GM and the coach vacate the team at the end of the season. But before that, of course, we knew going into this that there was going to be a tough year in a sense, because the team went through a lot of changes. Last offseason was enormous for this team. They lose Johnny Gaudreau in free agency. Matthew Tkachuk then informs them that, listen, I'm an RFA. I'll sign for the 1 year if that's all we can work out, but I really don't want to sign long-term. I don't see myself wanting to stay here. I would really prefer to be traded, and I'll sign a long-term contract with the team that we can work out to. Of course, he had all the leverage. He gave Brad Treliving a couple of teams that he would go to. The Florida Panthers won that battle, and of course, they made the trade to bring in Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. And of course, Huberdeau was coming off a 115-point season, career year, phenomenal playmaking winger. But then he dropped from 115 points to 55. You could not have predicted that. Mackenzie Weegar's play, wasn't maybe as much of a drop, but certainly, took some time to get used to his teammates and kind of get back to what he's capable of. We saw Elias Lindholm, who was a 42 goal scorer among the top line in hockey, playing with Tkachuk and Gaudreau. drop from 42 goals to 22 goals. That's a big drop. And Nazem Kadri, who they picked up in free agency, came off a career year in Colorado, putting up 87 points. He goes down to 56 points. I mean, I think it's everybody fair to say that Kadri was probably going to drop in point totals a little bit, that was going to be hard for him to duplicate. I mean, for a big chunk of last year in Colorado, when he put up those numbers, he was playing an elevated role due to injuries and getting more ice time with a lot of the top offensive players. That certainly made a bit of a difference for him to top up those point totals. Yes, he had to do the work and had to have the skill to do it, but I didn't think he was necessarily get that same opportunity in Calgary. And, I thought, well, even if he's a 70-point player, that's still pretty good for what he's getting paid. That he dropped down even further, down to 56. Of course, Andrew Mangiapane got a new contract as well. He went from 35 goals down to 17. Like, you can't have all of your, or not all, but most of your top talent have regression in the same year like that and expect to be better. Like, it's just, as much as a lot of people said, geez, even though Matthew Tkachuk was traded and Johnny Gaudreau left, is this team better? A lot of people said that going into last offseason. I kind of wondered myself. I personally thought that they might take a step back before they take a step forward. I thought the same thing about Florida. I was like, this could work out for both clubs, but we're probably going to see a transition phase that might be challenging as everybody gets used to their new spots. And will everybody click with their new line mates? Will the coaches work with these players? You just don't know how everything's going to mesh together and click. And certainly Daryl Sutter was not good for Jonathan Huberdeau. We can say that with absolute certainty. A lot of players at the end of the day voiced their displeasure with Sutter, and it was revealed at the end of the year, wanted out. If they wouldn't have fired Daryl Sutter, they probably had a long list of players that were on a trade and did not want to return or would not consider re-signing with this franchise or signing extensions. And the team was going to be in, I think, not in a good spot if they didn't make that move. Going into the offseason, though, they have 18 contracts on the books, so there's not a lot of wiggle room. They do have $82.5 million already used. The cap's expected to be $83.5, assuming that we only get the $1 million cap increase, which we don't know. That could change. There is speculation that the PA and the league are talking, and then it might, instead of being 1, might be 1.5 or 2. So it could be a little bit more, but with that, they only get just a little bit over $1 million in available cap space, which is not a lot considering that 18 players in their contract, that still leaves 4 to 5 open roster spots. So they can go with our smaller roster of 21 players, but still, it's not much room. They have some decisions to make. Let's take a look at their expiring contracts. What do they have for internal business to get under consideration here for RFAs and UFAs? RFAs, they actually have none. There's nobody. None of their younger players are expiring or need new contracts. So that's not something that they need to take a look at here. They do have a bunch of players that are eligible for extensions, but none of them which really fall into this category, with the exception of maybe like an Oliver Shillington. Otherwise, everybody else would be in a UFA type status. As of the UFAs that are right now, though, you have Milan Lucic, Nick Ritchie, Trevor Lewis, Troy Stetcher, Michael Stone, and Matthew Phillips is actually a Group 6 UFA, meaning he didn't get enough NHL games played by the time this contract expired, so he can actually be a UFA, and he is, because of the lack of games. So ultimately, I know there was already some talk about Phillips maybe re-signing in Calgary, but it sounds like he wants to explore the market a little bit before he commits to anything. No guarantee. As far as the other UFAs go, I'm not sure that really much of any of them come back. I would say that Stetcher and Stone are possibilities on the blue line. That would not be a huge shock. Michael Stone's been signing 1-year contracts with the Calgary Flames forever and a day for quite some time, since he was bought out all those years back. And when he did have a longer-term deal, I kind of half wondered, will Brad Treliving trying to sign him in Toronto as a depth defenseman there? Makes you wonder, because Treliving knew Stone from their days in Arizona. There was a bit of a gap there before he ended up in Calgary with Treliving again. But, it's just they kind of follow each other around. So, obviously, Treliving is fond of Stone, no doubt. But will the new GM, Craig Conroy, feel the same and try to sign Stone or Stetcher? There's a possibility, but I would say Lucic won't return. I doubt Lewis returns. Nick Ritchie, maybe, but unlikely. And Matthew Phillips is possible, but I'm thinking he's probably going to seek more of an opportunity, considering the lack of opportunity he's had in Calgary over the last couple of years, where he's been dominant in the AHL and not really getting much of an NHL opportunity, which is largely at the hand of Daryl Sutter. I think that's fair to say that that's all on him, because he's not fond of younger players, and we went through some interesting scenarios last season in regards to that. They do have a group of veterans, though, that are eligible for contract extensions, and you have to wonder what the status of those are going to be. Some of these guys might re-sign, but I have no doubt that at least a few of them will end up likely being traded. They can't keep them all, but that list is led by Tyler Toffoli, Elias Lindholm, Michael Backlund, Noah Hanifin, Chris Tanev, Nikita Zadorov, and as I mentioned earlier, Oliver Shillington. So, you're looking at, a big chunk of their blue line. That's half of their top 6 blue line back there that's on the final year of their contract. Hard to imagine all 3 of them re-signing, but difficult to say what the team is going to feel like here. Obviously, in the upfront, when it comes to Backlund, I know I've heard Elliot Friedman, for example, has said that he feels Backlund would really like to be captain. We know that Craig Conroy, the new GM of the team, has made it known that he wants to have a captain, and there will be one next year. As long as Backlund's still with his franchise, I suspect he would be one of the candidates for sure. But at this point, he's only 1 year left. I would think that if they're going to name a captain after not having one for a while, that they probably would want somebody that's under contract for more than 1 season. So I would think that they'd probably want to work out an extension with him for at least a couple more years before they would go down that road. But I think that's a real possibility. Lindholm seemed to be a top priority as well, so we'll have to see. But it's quite possible that whoever they feel like they're not going to extend, that those players could end up being potential trade bait that we see in the offseason with whatever changes this team decides it wants to try to make. So what are the top questions facing this franchise? Well, one of the big ones going into it was they get a new general manager and a new head coach. Well, we know the answer to one of those questions already and who the new GM is going to be. And that's Craig Conroy, who was speculated to be a front runner from the get-go. He's been with the franchise for a long time, former player. He's had all kinds of roles. He's worked in almost every department that they have within the front office, so he's very well experienced in that regard. So, to be a boss of a group of people that, you can actually say that you've done their job, it's important. Well-respected, a likable guy, hardworking player back in his playing days. The big question is who's Conroy going to bring in as the next head coach of the Calgary Flames? There's a lot of names that are out there in the rumor mill, speculation. One of those candidates would be former teammate and friend Alex Tanguay, who of course is an assistant coach with Detroit. Lots of other names are out there as well, including Gerard Gallant, who was recently let go from the New York Rangers, and several other experienced coaches. There's some internal candidates, including Mitch Love of the Wranglers, who's back-to-back American Hockey League Coach of the Year. Won that twice now. Not much more for him to really accomplish at that level, so hard to imagine that he doesn't get into the NHL in some capacity. There's also Muller and Huska, both with the organization as well, could be in the mix too. So I think more than likely, it's going to be an internal candidate. I think one of those guys are going to end up being the head coach. So we'll have to see where things go in that front. So obviously, they had the players or people internally to replace the guys that left. Now, another big question is goaltending. Do they trade a goaltender? And I think the answer is most likely Dustin Wolf, another guy at the American Hockey League level who really has nothing left to prove, deserves 100% to be in the NHL roster next year. He's probably not going to be a starting goaltender, though, being new to being a full-time NHLer. Between Jacob Markstrom and Danny Vladar, you would think Vladar would be the more likely candidate to be moved. Markstrom makes a lot more money, has a lot more term, arguably, a lot better goaltender too, mind you, but does have trade protection built into his contract. So it's hard to imagine Markstrom being moved out at this point. I guess crazier things have happened. I just don't see it. I think so. Vladar to me makes a ton of sense. I think he can probably be a pretty good trade chip to get decent value in return. He's been a pretty good backup goaltender so far. Obviously during his time in between a little bit of action in Boston, and then more of an opportunity with the Flames. Mentioned already too. Another big question is the guys that are eligible for extension. Who stays and signs and who goes? You got to imagine at least a few of those guys are going to be dealt. They can't afford to keep them all for one, and secondly, they're not going to want to anyway. So, could we see players like Toffoli or Lindholm or Hanifin, Tanev? Could any of those guys be moved? It's certainly possible. It's going to be interesting to see which ones do go. I think it's fair to say a player like Tyler Toffoli would have really high value right now. And he had a really good season coming off a World Championship tournament where he was the captain of Canada, led them to gold medal as well. So certainly, a really good value for what he earns on his contract compared to what he gives you on the ice. This guy is actually really high value. So as much as they probably do value keeping him, I can see there being high interest in him and good return value if they do decide that an extension's not what's best and they do decide to explore the trade route. But some of those guys are going to come and sign, and some of them are going to be moved. It's just a matter of what direction they go in, and that's going to be a big question that Craig Conroy has to figure out here. Certainly, another big one is what kind of impact can some of their young players have. It's pretty clear based on comments from Conroy when he was first hired and what we've seen from the team so far that there will be more youth on this roster getting more opportunity next year. I fully suspect Jacob Pelche, Walker Duehr, Coronado, maybe a guy like Phillips if he sticks around, all going to get opportunities. They're expected to have Oliver Shillington back, who was not there last season. It was, did not play due to family and personal reasons. So, that's going to make a big difference too. Get some more youth injected into this lineup, get Shillington back. I definitely see them trading at least one defenseman for sure. Because having Shillington back there does create a little bit of a log jam. And there might be some options here to move out one of the guys that they don't feel like they're going to extend, whether that's, Hanifin, Zadorov, Tanev. They all play a little bit of a different style there. And it's hard to imagine, there's no clear answer to me which one is more likely to move. So we'll have to see where things go. I mean, Tanev is a real solid guy back there, good character defenseman. Obviously not afraid to play physical, block shots, PK. But, certainly a little bit older too. Zadorov's another big, strong defenseman, but, not really viewed upon as being super strong, probably more of a third pair guy. Hanifin's a great skater, good puck mover. Not the most offensively gifted, but certainly, capable guy for sure. And with Mackenzie Weegar under a long-term contract now, I wonder if maybe Hanifin might be the more likely guy to go, given that, Weegar can certainly play that role, and they might think he can do that, strong enough on his own that maybe Hanifin is the guy that could replace, especially with Shillington coming in. They go with Shillington and Weegar as your more of the offensive guys, and you have guys like Zadorov and Tanev that can be your stronger defensively, shot blockers, more, play a defensive role. That might be something that we see. Hard to say, but Craig Conroy is certainly going to leave his imprint on this franchise, make some changes. Things will obviously be, I think, a little happier around the team in the locker room, get some more youth injected, and see how this team transitions the next year. I'm sure whatever they do make for decisions when it comes to the head coach and when it comes to some of the forward group, a big factor here is they need Jonathan Huberdeau to be Jonathan Huberdeau and get back to being close to a 100-point player like he's been for a big chunk of his career. Obviously he's getting paid the big bucks. I know that he didn't have a great relationship and how things worked out with Daryl Sutter, but he's going to get a chance for a brand new fresh start. He's used to being in Calgary now. That transition phase is over. It's time to get back to being what he was, and hopefully they can help him find that and make it happen, because that'll make a huge difference right there in getting things over. I know Mackenzie Weegar, who went to the World Championships with a few of his Flame teammates, including Toffoli and Lucic. I think going there and having a strong performance, I think he was a top defenseman for the tournament, won gold medal. I'm sure he's feeling a lot better about his season now than when he was a few months ago, and hopefully Huberdeau can get back to that in the fall as well. So let me know your thoughts on the Flames and what we should expect from them this offseason down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. Stay tuned for another bunch more teams coming in this series here, as well as all the news and trade rumors around the NHL. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.